musicians, members of our music faculty, Joe Alfar, John Kirk, Rose, Alan Sean, Michael Wimberly, and remotely, Eddie Badger. Good morning. I am Laura Walker, President of Bennington. It is my privilege to welcome you to Bennington's 90th Convocation. As we gather today for the very first day of this academic year, we acknowledge that Bennington, Vermont is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Abenaki and Mohican people. We honor the land and the people who have been its stewards through the generations. Welcome all, class of 2026. Let's give them a shout out. Transfers. And our utterly amazing new faculty members. We have 9 new faculty members and 16 new visiting. Let's give a shout out to them. And especially to our extraordinary students and faculty who are returning. Welcome home. So let me set a scene for you. It's September 6th, 1932, exactly 90 years ago today. The United States is 3 years into the Depression. Unemployment is at 24%. Many Americans are living in shanty towns. Here in Vermont, more than 1,500 farms will close. Systemic racism is rampant, evident in the recent conviction and murder sentence of the Scottsboro boys, a travesty of our legal system. It is a dark time. Yet, 1932 also is the dawn of the Harlem Renaissance, and artists like August Savage, Langston Hughes, and Frida Kahlo are using poetry and painting as a means of social protest. And at the same time, educators across the country have come together to imagine a radical new approach to education. Here in Bennington, Vermont, at this spot, on this day, 90 years ago, a new college opened. Bennington was conceived as a laboratory to explore an innovative approach to education. You know this, self-directed learning, hands-on experience. The founding prospectus, which was the founding document of Bennington, was endorsed by presidents and academic leaders of more than a dozen colleges. They all came together from Harvard and Radcliffe and Smith and Swarthmore. They all came together and said, we need a college that does these things. The arts were integrated into the very fabric of Bennington education. Right here, the very first modern dance program on the college campus was created by Martha Hill and Martha Graham. The founders had a bold vision. That vision is expressed in what has become our guiding document, the Bennington College Commencement Statement. We begin each academic year and each commencement by reading the statement, which I do today, exactly 90 years ago to the day when the college opened. Bennington regards education as a sensual and ethical, no less than intellectual process. It seeks to liberate and nurture the individuality, the creative intelligence, and the ethical and aesthetic sensibility of its students, to the end that their richly varied natural endowments will be directed towards self-fulfillment and toward constructive social purposes. We believe that these educational goals are best served by demanding of our students active participation in the planning of their own programs and in the regulation of their own lives on campus. Student freedom is not the absence of restraint. However, it is rather the fullest possible substitution of habits of self-restraint for restraint imposed by others. The exercise of student freedom is the very condition of a meaningful education and an essential aspect of the nurture of free citizens dedicated to civilized values and capable of creative and constructive membership in modern society. A 17-year-old young woman named Jane Woodhouse was at that very first convocation in 1932. She had traveled to Vermont from Connecticut, and she was so excited to be in the inaugural class here. She thrived in her studies at Bennington. She studied theater and literature, and she developed a strong sense of confidence, that kind of Bennington confidence. After graduation, though, Jane decided not to pursue a career, if you will, in theater, but she really thought about what impact she wanted to have on this world. So she decided to go to law school. For a woman living in the 30s and 40s, that was quite remarkable. But what was even more extraordinary was that she then devoted her life to fight for the rights and the dignity of those who were diagnosed with mental illness. She embodied what the commencement statement described as a life devoted to constructive social purposes. Her legacy is still alive today, and we all stand on her shoulders. It's remarkable, really remarkable, that 90 years from the day Bennington opened for the first time, these values, these founding values that are in the commencement statement are still very, very much alive. And they are part of our everyday work and our everyday education. But even as we embrace these values, today's Bennington, thankfully, looks very different. Since the 1960s, our student body has included men, and we proudly welcome those who are queer and trans, LGBTQIA+. We are more diverse and we're more international. But we need to do more. I, along with my colleagues, are committed to creating an even more diverse, accessible, and intentionally anti-racist community where everyone feels welcome and feels energized to be the very best version of themselves. I call on you to dedicate yourselves to being a community that is welcoming, collaborative, kind, and empathetic, one that celebrates our differences. Together, let's work toward a world that is beautiful, sustainable, democratic, and just. 90 years ago, the country was faced with an existential crisis. Does American democracy, with all of its failings, continue to evolve to live up to what President Abraham Lincoln said, the best angels of our nature? Or does it collapse, consumed by the equally strong American currents of racism, anti-Semitism, and sexism? The echoes you hear today are very real. We have witnessed just recently the overturning of liberties long established, including reproductive rights in so many states, voting rights, and the right to be who you want to be. These are attacks on all of us and on the very idea of democracy. But it's also a time of hope. Artists are calling out injustice, including our very own Jen Liu, Mariam Ghani, and Alana Clark. Her exhibit, A Particular Fantasy, will soon be featured in the Usedan Gallery later this month, and I really hope that you will join and go see her incredible work. Hope is at the very core of who we are as individuals and as a community. Hope requires courage. It is also a political act. Bennington is a place of hope, a 90-year-old experiment in the very best sense of that word. Let's together continue this radical experiment. Let's be creative, let's be curious, and let's be bold. Thank you. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our student speaker, Gianna Rodriguez. She embodies these Bennington values. This summer, Gianna did research in pediatric neuroscience at the University of Virginia. She's the president of the Student Educational Policies Committee, SEPC for short, as well as the Fencing Club and the Crochet Club. Love it. On top of all of this, she is actually also the house chair, or one of the house chairs of Franklin. Gianna came to Bennington with the intent to study music, history, and French. But in quintessential Bennington style, after a few terms, she shifted her focus. Her plan now focuses on biology and writing. I am delighted now to introduce Gianna Rodriguez.
Dance like no one's watching. You don't know what you don't know. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And my favorite, every journey begins with one step. Just wanted to get those cliches out of the way. Full disclosure, I'm very nervous being up here in front of you. I never would have thought I'd be the one ushering you into possibly one of the most important time points of your life, your entrance into Bennington. And truthfully, it's because I can see the kid I was 3 years ago very clearly sitting in that chair where Joe Tucker is, shaking her head and saying, "That's not me up there on that podium." I remember wanting to leave Convocation as soon as possible, get back to my room, let all my friends know back home that I hadn't made a friend here yet, and that if I just kept my head low for 4 years, maybe everything would be okay. Like a lot of other flow students, college wasn't an option until it was. Bennington provided me with the opportunity to afford a college education, and I took it, but I didn't really understand the weight of that privilege. I like to think of choosing your destiny in a college as opening a set of gifts. Each school you applied to offered something different, whether that be name, a professor you wanted to work with, or a history that drew you in. The reason you're here, the reason Bennington chose you, is because you're the student that's drawn in by the mystery, the challenge, and the opportunity of a blank canvas. My first piece of advice is this: don't forget that gift. It's easy to throw under your bed and ignore, and that's a very hopefully cliche, but I hope in this brief speech you lend me enough room to prove just how much this place is yours to build in, to create in, and to take. I don't blame you if you flat out don't believe me. I wouldn't believe me, and I didn't, listening to speakers like me talk about these students that found the cure for cancer, negotiated world peace, and they did it all when they were 5. And I sat there thinking to myself, it's too late for me. You know, I was a bad kid. I lied, cheated, stole, got in fights. I was in and out of the guidance counselor's office all of middle school and on probation most of high school. I didn't know you were supposed to study for the SATs. And I didn't know that all of that history, everything I thought about myself could not matter less the second I stepped foot on this campus. You need to know that what you've done and who you are is just the primer. And it's a sacrifice, giving your past and self to a great big unknown, almost like a baptism. I want to tell you a story about the day Bennington took its sacrifice from me. It sounds heavy, but it's a story about how I toppled down a hill. It was the day after I met my best friend. I never thought I'd meet someone like him, especially in the dining hall, the most loud and jarring place on this campus. But we'd agreed the evening before we'd meet at sunrise by the flagpole for an early morning bike ride. Part of the reason they actually don't let you use those bikes by campus security anymore. Anyway, he fixed them up, and before checking anything, I go flying down the hill of the main entrance. The wind's in my hair, I'm a real college student, and I realize my bike doesn't have any brakes, and there's a car coming. So I swing down into the great grass field, rolling into the abyss, and we're laughing as hard as we still do to this day. The sun's coming up over the mountains. I can't find my sunglasses anywhere. They were my favorite pair, but it was the first time I'd laughed being here. And we agreed right then, this was a symbol of sacrifice. Take my favorite sunglasses, take me, and in exchange, give me the best 4 years of my life. I let it happen, and I cannot stress enough how great it'll be if you do too. As Laura mentioned, I came here to study history and French, but my first year advisor was Amy McClellan, professor of biology, and by far the coolest person I've ever met. She terrified me. She was part of the big, scary world of science, a topic I'm sure we can all feel is mutually unsavory and mucks up bad feelings of math and messed up homework. It was science for me, but for you, that terrifying unknown might be music, a painting class, poetry. Let yourself be scared. Take the poetry class, take biology. The first science course I ever took here at Bennington was chemistry. Terrifying, but my favorite professor, John Bullock, was so amazing at making the terrifying unknown not only someplace accessible, but something students could conquer. I'm now a pre-med student and proud member of the Dickinson STEM family, and it still terrifies me. My professors can very much attest to that. It feels just like I did riding down that hill. There aren't any brakes, a car is coming. The only way to turn is into the vast, never-ending field. But it means every day I walk this campus, it remains just as thrilling, just as much an exciting mystery. And you're here because I'm sure you'll find home in that unknown too. Welcome back, everyone, and to the freshmen, welcome home. Thank you. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Alfredo Medina, our Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Chief Diversity Officer.
Welcome, Bennington College class of 2026. I do hope you're enjoying your time getting to know one another and really making this place your next home for 4 years. Thank you, President Walker and Gianna. Those were really inspiring words, really hard to follow. A special thank you to our esteemed faculty, staff, and all our students who make Bennington a special place to study, to work, and to learn. For those of you who've yet to know me, I consider myself a storyteller. I grew up Dominican kid, part of Dominican culture to Dominican immigrants who helped shape who I am today because of stories. It's what sustained me. And so I want to share a story with you, my first week in college. As I think back to that first year on campus, the one thing that caused me the most anxiety that I had not anticipated after leaving New York City and going to Utica College in central New York was, just wait for it, laundry. I grew up in the Dominican household that was pretty patriarchal. My mother handled all the domestic chores, including doing my laundry. And I'm not gonna lie, I was happy with this arrangement. And I figured, hey, I'm not gonna bother to ask to help. And here was my hardworking mother, not really teaching me about this. And I'm really thinking to myself, like, how difficult can washing clothes be? Until the day arrived to do laundry. And I stood there in this laundry room just looking at these machines. I understood the concept of putting like the clothes inside of the machine, but do I throw it in all at once? I seen people separating it, right? And I'm also thinking to myself, okay, detergent, fabric softener, different slots. But the worst part was, I really gotta pay to do my laundry. And as I was trying to figure this out, walked in Jacqueline, who goes by Jackie, a first-year international student from Jamaica. She walked into this cramped laundry room with her laundry bag. And as I'm sitting there, minding my business, I take all my clothes and I'm just like, we're gonna put it all into this one washing machine, whites and colors all together. And she looked at me with bewilderment and just kind of looked at me in this way and just said, what y'all do? I got that right, Maurice? Or her Jamaican accent and her patois. What are you doing? And without blinking an eye and being the assertive Caribbean woman she was, she kissed her teeth. That's big in Caribbean culture. She did. Brushed me to the side and started instructing me step by step on how to wash my clothing. And if it wasn't embarrassing enough, she went out in the hall and invited her other friends. Another Jackie, who was a Black American and the first Black American queer person I ever interacted with, and another Jackie, who was Barbadian American. And I couldn't make this up if I tried. The Jackie trio sat patiently with me to ensure that my laundry was done perfectly. The Jackies even showed me where to put the fabric softener and how to shake out my clothes before throwing them into the dryer. These three women from different places with varied lived experiences with the same first name became my community. Aside from laundry duty, we learned about each other's racial, cultural, and religious experiences and expectations. We laughed together, we argued sometimes. We worked to create spaces for each other that were brave, safe, and empowering. We honored our similarities, but more importantly, embraced our differences. And honestly, if it weren't for my community in those first few weeks, I'm not sure if I would have persisted that semester, let alone persisted and graduated. Today, two Jackies remain in my life. Sadly, Jackie, my Black American sister, and really the matriarch of the group, the one who took kind of ownership of everything, she passed away from cancer 5 years ago. So reflecting on my story, what happens when we bring together a diverse class of students from 38 states and 24 countries to experience community? Building a sense of community begins by honoring who you are and the intersections of your identities. The late and incomparable bell hooks shared that a beloved community is formed not by the eradication of difference, but by its affirmation. by each of us claiming the identities and cultural legacies that shape who we are and how we live in the world. So thank you for choosing Bennington as your new home. Now let's work together to create a community that is accepting, gender-affirming, playful, trusting, and above all, anti-racist in how we interact, behave, and show up as a whole person. Thank you. At this time, please join me in welcoming my colleague and friend, Bennington's Director of Counseling and Psychological Services, Kat Daley.
So there are infinite possibilities of what I could say standing here today. And I'm just grateful for the honor and the privilege that it has been to get to choose. Perhaps ironically, after much intention, reflection, and a sort of embarrassing number of drafts, one of the most simple and basic but profound parts of our shared lives, of life itself, came through, is what I'd like to say. Any guesses to what that is? To breathe. Look, I've done this work long enough to know that the breath can have a bit of a bad rep. It can actually be triggering just to think about, much less to engage with. So for those of us in the room who have received a misplaced or even an aggressive invitation to just take a breath, I see you. I acknowledge you and I invite you to stay with me anyways, just in case there's something here for you today. Because after all, it is literally the first action we take in our own bodies and one of the last actions on the way out. And it is the thing that threads through the rest of the journey in between. Who in this room has seen a baby take its first breath? Or a newborn baby breathe? It is so full, so complete. The whole core of the body expands and contracts. You can literally watch the whole body being breathed. Our lungs are huge. They range from the bottom of our collarbones to the bottom of our rib cage. That's a lot of lung. And our actual capacity for breath is huge, much greater than we often realize or utilize. On some level, we all know this matters, that the oxygen we're pulling in through our breath gets carried around through our organs, to our fingertips and toe tips, to our brain, oxygenating the brain. It can help us with focus and memory and attention. So many ancient wisdom traditions around the world, spiritual practices and religions also integrate and talk about the breath. Different names and connections to the breath, prana, chi, ki, literally meaning and translating to life force. Our life force that animates everything else that we do from the moment we are born until the moment we expire. We breathe all day, every day, sometimes with a lot of constriction. When we rush, when we feel like we have to prove we are enough, when systems don't feel safe or straight up aren't safe, when moving in and out of stressed and toxic living conditions, think about the impact to our collective breath, our collective life force over these last few years. Fear of breathing on, near, and with each other. Fear of hurting one another just through our breath. And what do we do when we're afraid? We literally limit our energy source, our life force, reducing our life force when we hold shallow and constrict the breath. All of this takes a toll on how deeply we breathe, and arguably, therefore, how fully we live. So I champion the breath every chance I get, because in 13 years as a mental health therapist, it is the one tool or practice that I have discovered that we all share. It cuts across identities. It's free. It goes with us. It's accessible pretty much any given moment. It includes muscles that you can strengthen and cultivate over time, and it is powerful. Serving as a direct tonic to the nervous system, when we slow down the breath and breathe in through our nose and out through the mouth, literally it changes our chemistry and helps to settle the body and our mind, freeing up more life force to flow throughout the whole. So if you, like me, want to be successful and liberate your full potential as part of this community this year, practice conscious breathing. Use the pause of the breath when you don't know what else to do. It'll buy you a beat in the moment, and it also will gift you more oxygen to think or feel into what comes next that most serves and aligns with your goals, your values, your relationships, and your health. So when your brand new roommate does something a little strange, or maybe even a lot of strange, because they will, before you react, take a breath. When you experience or see someone microaggress against you or someone in the community, and you need to speak some truth and set some boundaries, definitely take a breath. When you are sitting in class and you really want to use your voice, but you feel too afraid to speak, breathe into the fear and speak anyways. And when you're staring at that confusing laundry machine, waiting for your jackies to show up and help you, deepen the breath and enjoy the wait. I love this community. I believe in Bennington and all of our infinite possibilities. And if you need someone to be with and breathe with, there are many of us here who want to be with and breathe with you too. So come find us. I know with every oxygenated cell of my being that this is one of the ways that we transform and heal within ourselves, within our complex and flawed systems, and as a world so deeply in need of transformation and healing. So try it out. Let me know how it goes. May it be of benefit to us all, and may we all be well. I hope you create and live an inspiring life here at Bennington and long, long after. Welcome to Bennington and welcome home. And now I am so pleased to introduce Bennington's Provost, the one and only Dr. Maurice Hall.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Kat, for reminding us to sometimes just simply breathe and how important that is. The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to retain two completely opposing thoughts in the mind at the same time, and yet retain the ability to function. Two completely opposing thoughts in the mind at the same time, and yet retain the ability to function. This has been one of my favorite quotes because it points to an element of education that I think is incredibly important and probably now more than ever, and it's the embrace of complexity. So my favorite words. The idea that what we do when we pursue a vigorous and a rigorous education is that we exist at the intersections of the tensions and the contradictions, things that frustrate us, things that we don't fully understand, the uncertainties. And now more than ever, we need that ability to function in the middle of the chaos, the ambiguity. We need people who will be willing to embrace something that at this moment may seem counterintuitive for me to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. We'll embrace the ability sometimes, not always, to doubt. To doubt. To not always run with certainty, or sometimes even impose certainty where it may not necessarily belong. And sometimes that takes courage and a willingness to think differently, but that's what Bennington is all about. And so there is no time, there is no greater time than at Convocation to begin that approach to creation and new beginnings. You're here because you're going to, if you're new and if you have been here before, continue an amazing journey. The plan, few work term. This idea that you will be involved in a guided direction of your own education that's linked to reflection and dialogue. It's an exciting time. And yet you do it at a time in the world where it's confusing, as you've heard this morning. And much that is happening gives us cause for pause. For 90 years, Bennington has firmly believed in the application of pursuits, whether that is writers writing, dancers dancing, or scholars researching. Our work is grounded in study and in exploration, but it is also grounded in the practice of what you are doing. President Walker has referred to this as active participation from our commencement statement. And what does that mean? Well, to me, it means that you are fully present in what you are doing, fully participating as a part and as a member of our community, fully present and fully there, fully enjoying the moment, experiencing that moment where you take a breath and breathe, be there now. It's fully participating in your own education, on our campus, and across the respective fields that are represented here at Bennington. Your guides will be amazing professors, many of whom are in this room today. And this morning, one in particular will take you on an extraordinary intellectual journey as a marker of how we set the intellectual tone for the year here. You're going to be incredibly fortunate to hear from Professor Maya Cantu, an interdisciplinary scholar, teacher, historian, and dramaturg. Dr. Cantu, as many of you know, is a member of the drama faculty. She earned her Doctor of Fine Arts and Master of Fine Arts degrees in dramaturgy and dramatic criticism at Yale School of Drama. And since 2013, she served as a primary researcher and dramaturgical advisor at Off-Broadway's Mint Theater Company. Her writings have appeared in numerous publications, including most recently an essay, Beyond the Rupee Gal. It explores the arts of the great Ada Bricktop-Smith and her contributions to musical theater. She has an amazing presentation for you, and she'll take you on an extraordinary journey. And so this morning, everyone, it is my great pleasure to welcome, and I ask you to welcome with me, Dr. Maya Cantu.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Hall. I'd like to start my talk by talking about reality television. I confess that during my precious summer downtime, I watched a lot of it in the form of the many global spin-offs of the drag performance competition show, which some of you might know, RuPaul's Drag Race. During a summer in which my heart ached and my head spun from a painful and bewildering news cycle, the global queens on Drag Race steadied my nerves and sharpened my wits. They swayed, they slayed, and they spurred my spirit. During this summer binge, I've been particularly fascinated by the climactic showdowns known to Drag Race fans as lip sync for your life. The queens who thrive in these sequences are known as lip sync assassins because of the subtle and precise skill it requires to nail this challenge. Competing queens must synchronize their enunciations and movements to the voices of global pop divas like Lizzo on American Drag Race, Thalia on Drag Race España, Mylène Farmer on Drag Race France, and Ratha Pangam on Drag Race Thailand, my favorite, at least so far, of the global spin-offs that I've seen. The successful lip sync assassin will not only seamlessly channel the voice of a famous diva, but express her own essential and unique qualities, ranging from regal to ridiculous. Through the artifice of imitation, these queens convey their authenticity. Watching the global spin-offs of Drag Race this summer reminded me of the exciting challenge you all face as you begin your fall classes, and for many of you, your first terms at Bennington College. I'd like to invite you to embrace, metaphorically, but perhaps also literally, if you're so inclined, the spirit of lip syncing. Bennington College is an ideal place to experiment in trying on and trying out different voices. This sense of freedom and exploration for me is a big part of what defines the Bennington College experience and makes the college feel like home. How many different costumes, poses, postures, and perspectives might you try on throughout the stages of your plan to see what singular voice might emerge by the end of the song? So let me make this metaphor a little more concrete. To do this, I'd like to briefly talk about how two of the 20th century artists I most admire, Stephen Sondheim and Lorraine Hansberry, embraced the principles of lip syncing by trying on different voices and styles at formative stages of their lives and work. So let's start with the great Stephen Sondheim. You might think that Sondheim, who passed away in November of last year, became one of the greatest composer lyricists of all time by listening to a lot of songs from musicals. He certainly did this by closely studying the craftsmanship of the great songwriters who came before him, including his personal mentor, Oscar Hammerstein II. But would Sondheim have become Sondheim without classical music, world cinema, puzzles, and video games? That is, by immersing himself in interests outside of Broadway shows. Listen to the cast album of a show like Little Night Music, an operetta based on a classic Swedish film by Ingmar Bergman. In it, you'll hear an homage to the phantasmagoric elegance of La Valse by Maurice Ravel, the French impressionist composer, who Sondheim once confessed that he, quote, imitated all the time. Listen to Sweeney Todd, and you'll hear his tributes to the suspenseful Hollywood film scores of Bernard Herrmann. Sondheim blended his channeling of multiple stylistic voices with a deep sense of inquiry into forms you might not associate with show tunes. It's interesting that Sondheim's addiction to crossword puzzles informed the intricate wordplay of his lyrics and the structure of his shows. And Sondheim, as I only recently learned, also loved video games. And he even briefly considered becoming a game designer after the disappointing Broadway flop of his show, Merrily We Roll Along. The composer, of course, bounced back from this disappointment, but he didn't stop drawing upon the influence of video games. I recently read, in fact, in a piece by the theater curator, Doug Reside, that Sondheim invented an unrealized video game inspired by his own quest musical Into the Woods, in which fairy tale characters reclaim their stories from an omniscient narrator and from the Brothers Grimm. So what can we take away from all of this? I would urge you all to find inspiration in Sondheim's form of lip syncing, which is one that asks us to leave our comfort zones behind and adventure into the woods among many different styles and disciplines. I believe that Bennington College is the perfect place to do this, whether you're excited about studying the visual arts, music, the sciences, or a discipline of your own creation. For all of these, Sondheim invites us not to put restrictions on the forms that our own blank pages or canvases might take. So switching to another example. The great playwright Lorraine Hansberry was stylistically just as much of a lip sync assassin as Sondheim. You might already know A Raisin in the Sun as one of the towering masterpieces of 20th century drama, as well as the first play by an African-American woman to run on Broadway. A Raisin in the Sun focuses on the younger family as they contend against forces of poverty and systemic racism and strive to achieve their individual and collective American dreams in 1950s Southside Chicago. It's a play that springs from multiple sources as Hansberry challenged stereotypes, both in the drama and in her process of writing it. Many of the play's origins began for Hansberry, in fact, in college in the late 1940s, when she was a student for 2 years at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. As one of only a few Black students at the school and the only Black woman in her housing residence, Hansberry endured a painful sense of isolation. At the same time, this radically curious and politically radical young woman remained open to a vast array of ideas and inspirations. In 1948, she saw a university production of the 1924 play Juno and the Peacock by the Irish playwright Sean O'Casey, and it changed her life. Watching O'Casey's play, Hansberry realized that global drama could be a powerful source of inspiration as she worked to find her own unique voice as a fiction writer, journalist, and emerging playwright. In the late 1940s, anyone who doubted Hansberry, big mistake, might have asked questions such as, what could a play about the life of poor Dubliners in the 1920s say to a woman, young, gifted, and Black, in the immortal words of Hansberry herself, coming of age in a mid-century US during the turbulence of the civil rights movement? Well, O'Casey said a lot to her. Viewing this university production, she was struck by the earthy, poetic dialogue drawn directly from the streets and living rooms of Dublin. She was also roused by O'Casey's keen sense of social, economic, and political protest, writing in an Ireland whose colonization by the British wasn't so far removed from the oppressions of Jim Crow. Hansberry may have learned to lip sync the style of Sean O'Casey, but she also channeled the voices of the many African-American writers who paved her way. She connected her artistry to the traditions of the Harlem Renaissance, as well as of her native Chicago. Famously, lines from Langston Hughes's poem Harlem inspired the title, and not a little of the substance of her great 1959 play, which takes the cue from Hughes's lines. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? As Hansberry's biographer, Imani Perry, has pointed out, A Raisin in the Sun also channels the poetry of Hansberry's fellow Chicago writer, Gwendolyn Brooks. Brooks's 1945 poem, Kitchenette Building, evocatively asks, but could a dream send up through onion fumes its white and violet fight with fried potatoes, and yesterday's garbage ripening in the hall, flutter or sing an aria down these rooms? Set in its own kitchenette of dreams and onion fumes, where Walter Lee and Beneath the Younger defiantly sing the arias of the younger generation, A Raisin in the Sun is one of those works of art that finds the universal in the specific. But the specific for Hansberry was also not limited by geographical boundaries or by the limitations that others would impose on her. Hansberry's model of lip syncing urges us to honor and carry on the distinctiveness of our own cultural traditions. But she's also not afraid to absorb the Irish cadences of Sean O'Casey. Looking back at that college production of Juno and the Peacock, she told Studs Terkel, I was 17 and I did not think of writing the melody as I knew it, in a different key, but I believe it entered my consciousness and stayed there. Hansberry challenges us to transpose the melodies that affect us across borders and to do so respectfully, sensitively, and with wide open empathy. So in talking about Sondheim and Hansberry, I perhaps wandered away from the global runways of Drag Race, where I started this talk. But now I'd like to return to them. After all, it's a big part of how I've relaxed and recharged over the summer. I applaud the skill and fighting spirits of the performers in the Lip Sync for Your Life battles. After all, competition is a vital part of the drag pageants and ballrooms that Drag Race references, honoring a history of queer people sharpening their wits and moves to survive and thrive in a hostile world. Yet Drag Race is also a reality television show, and like most reality TV, plays upon scarcity models and zero-sum competition. I urge all of you to look for alternatives to the idea that there can be only one queen who takes home the crown. Because what also makes Bennington feel like home for me is the spirit of collaboration and community that I found at this school. So to illustrate this, let me tell you about one of my favorite lip sync battles. In the 9th episode of Drag Race Thailand, one of the queens, Kana Warrior, made a plea for surrendering her place in the competition to another queen, Anjali Anong. This spirit of generosity prompted a truly unforgettable performance. In the middle of the lip sync, what was meant to be a fierce showdown between two lip sync assassins unexpectedly transformed into a joyous duet. Kana and Anjali danced together in perfect harmony as they strew garlands on each other, clapped hands, and matched each other's movements. The judges on the panel were very moved by this display of lip syncing for love, and remarkably, neither Anjali nor Kana was voted off. Bandit, one of the other competing queens, commented on their performance. We're friends, we're rivals, but we can still be together and love each other and not care about results. I hope you'll all care and care deeply about results. But I also hope you'll look at them in the sense of the passion you put into your work and your studies, the ethical actions you might affect, and the relationships you make in the classroom, the community, and the world. Make this school your runway, but make it wide enough to share with others. Don't be afraid to try on voices or costumes that might feel strange, ill-fitting, or unfamiliar. Know that at Bennington College, you'll be encouraged to try on as many as your heart, your imagination, and your closet will hold. In the wise words of Drag Race Thailand co-host Art Arya, dare to be yourself, dare to be someone else. Thank you. And I wish you all, thank you. And I wish you all a fantastic and transformative start to the term. Thank you so much. We can all now proceed to the dining hall. Musicians, can you please play us out?